Some footage just surfaced that has the entire hip-hop community talking, and it involves Snoop Dogg, Tupac's ex-girlfriend Kidada Jones, and a moment from the 90s that nobody knew existed until now. The video shows Snoop and Kidada at what appears to be a private gathering just months after Pac's death, and the way they're interacting has people asking some serious questions about what really went down during that painful period. This isn't some grainy cell phone clip either. We're talking high-quality footage that somebody kept hidden for nearly 3 decades. Let me give you the context here, because without it, none of this makes sense. Kidada Jones, Quincy Jones's daughter, was deeply in love with Tupac. They got engaged in 1995, and by all accounts, she was one of the few people who truly understood him during those chaotic death row years. When Tupac got shot in Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996, Kidada was supposed to be with him that night but stayed back at the hotel. She rushed to the hospital and stayed by his side until he died 6 days later. The last thing Tupac apparently said to her was about a ring. He wanted to get her. That's how close they were. Now here's where it gets complicated. Snoop and Tupac had a relationship that shifted dramatically in those final months. They came up together at death row, performed together, partied together. According to Snoop's own interviews on platforms like Drink Champs, he and Pac were tight until tensions started building in 1996. Tupac felt like Snoop wasn't riding hard enough for death row during the East Coast-West Coast beef. There were moments where Pac would call Snoop out, questioning his loyalty, asking why he wasn't more vocal in defending the label and the West Coast. The footage that just went viral shows Snoop and Kidada at what researchers believe is a death row affiliated gathering sometime in early 1997. They're sitting close, talking, and there's a familiarity there that has people wondering about the timeline. Some fans are arguing that Snoop was just being supportive of someone going through grief. Others are pointing out that the body language tells a different story. Kidada has her hand on Snoop's arm in one frame, and they're both laughing about something in another. For context, this is only months after Tupac's murder, when wounds were still fresh and the hip-hop world was reeling. What makes this footage particularly interesting is what Snoop has said publicly about his relationship with Tupac's inner circle after the death. In a 2022 interview, Snoop admitted that he felt guilty for not being there for Pac in those final months. He talked about how the distance between them grew because of pressure from Suge Knight and the chaotic energy at death row. Snoop has mentioned multiple times that he wishes he could have had one more conversation with Tupac to clear the air. But this video suggests that he stayed connected to people in Pac's life in ways that weren't public knowledge. According to people who were around death row during that era, the parties and gatherings didn't stop after Tupac died. If anything, they intensified. Snoop has described these events as a mix of mourning and celebration, where people would drink, reminisce, and try to make sense of the violence that had taken their friend. The atmosphere was heavy. Artists like Snoop, Dre, and others in the death row camp were dealing with survivor's guilt while also trying to navigate a label that was falling apart from the inside. Here's something most people don't know. Kidada Jones essentially disappeared from the public eye after Tupac's death. She stopped doing interviews, stopped being photographed at events, and distanced herself from the hip-hop scene entirely. Friends of hers from that time have said she was devastated beyond what words could describe. So seeing her at a death row party, seemingly comfortable and engaged in conversation with Snoop, raises questions about what kind of support system she had during that period and who she turned to when the grief became unbearable. The person who leaked this footage claims it came from a private collection that belonged to someone in Suge Knight's inner circle. Allegedly, there are hours of similar videos from death row parties, studio sessions, and private moments that have never seen the light of day. This particular clip was reportedly part of a larger tape that documented gatherings throughout 1996 and 1997. The source says more footage is coming. And if that's true, we might be about to see a completely different side of this era that challenges everything we thought we knew. Social media has been going wild with theories. Some people are convinced that Snoop and Kidada had a relationship that was kept quiet out of respect for Tupac's memory. Others think the footage is being misinterpreted and that what we're seeing is just two people bonding over shared trauma. There's also a faction arguing that this video proves Snoop moved on from Tupac's death quicker than he's let on in interviews, which would explain some of the tension that existed between him and other Tupac loyalists in the years that followed. What we do know from documented history is that Snoop's relationship with Death Row became strained after Tupac's murder. He's talked openly about how Suge Knight tried to control every aspect of his life, from who he could talk to where he could go, to what he could say in interviews. Snoop eventually left Death Row in 1998, citing the toxic environment and the violence that seemed to follow the label everywhere. He's mentioned that staying there felt like waiting for his own death, and he had to get out to survive. Kidada Jones has only spoken about Tupac publicly a handful of times since his death. In a 2017 interview, she described their relationship as the most authentic love she'd ever experienced. She talked about how Tupac saw through all the Hollywood superficiality and connected with her on a spiritual level. She also mentioned that losing him changed her fundamentally and that she's never fully recovered from that loss. Seeing her in this newly surfaced footage, appearing to laugh and enjoy herself, is jarring for fans who have only known her public narrative of eternal mourning. The timing of this footage release is interesting too. It comes at a moment when there's renewed interest in Tupac's unsolved murder. Recent developments in the case, including the arrest of Dwayne Keefe D. Davis in 2023, have brought the 1996 shooting back into headlines. People are re-examining relationships, timelines, and allegiances from that era, trying to piece together what really happened and who knew what. This video of Snoop and Kidada adds another layer to an already complex story. There's also the question of why this footage is surfacing now, almost 30 years later. Some conspiracy theorists believe it's being released strategically to distract from other revelations or to rewrite certain narratives about Death Row. Others think it's simply someone cashing in on nostalgia and the current appetite for 90s hip-hop content. Whatever the reason, the impact is undeniable. The video has millions of views across platforms, and it sparked conversations about grief, loyalty, friendship, and how we remember our icons. What's particularly fascinating is how different people are interpreting the same footage. Younger fans who didn't live through the 90s see it as a sweet moment of connection between two people dealing with loss. Older heads who remember the intensity of that era see potential betrayal or, at minimum, a complexity that doesn't fit the clean narratives we've been told. Both perspectives have merit, and that's what makes this so compelling. We're watching something real, unfiltered, and unplanned from a time when cameras weren't everywhere and people's private moments actually stayed private. Snoop has built a carefully crafted public image over the past 2 decades. He's the lovable stoner, the football coach, the friendly celebrity who gets along with everyone. But footage like this reminds us that his history is far more complicated. He came from gang culture, survived the most violent era of hip-hop, watched friends get murdered, and had to navigate impossible situations where loyalty could get you killed. The man in this video with Kidada is closer to that original Snoop before the persona was fully developed and polished for mainstream consumption. So what does this all mean? Honestly, we may never know the full story. Unless Snoop or Kidada decide to speak on this footage directly, we're left to speculate based on a few minutes of silent video and decades of incomplete information. What we can say is that relationships during the Death Row era were messy, complicated, and often contradicted the public narratives. People dealt with trauma in different ways. Some isolated themselves, others sought comfort in whoever was available, and many made decisions they later regretted. The question I want to leave you with is this. Does this footage change how you view Snoop's relationship with Tupac's legacy, or does it just show two people trying to survive an impossible situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments because I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you're interested in more deep dives into hip-hop history that doesn't make it into the documentaries, make sure you're subscribed because we're just getting started with these stories. There's so much more footage apparently coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss what surfaces next.